Hey everybody, it's Leslie Tagorda. Welcome to our 1-year anniversary episode. And today we have my right-hand man, Jeff Campanero.
Hi everyone.
Today we are going to be sharing everything that we've learned in the last year of podcasting, what we desired when we started the podcast, what we've accomplished, our process, what we've learned, the big impacts, and what we want to create in the future. Of course, we'll be ending this podcast with the Astrology of the Week, but we hope you enjoy our very special 55th episode, our 1-year anniversary episode. Aloha! Welcome to the Savvy Luminary, an astrology podcast for entrepreneurs. I'm your host, Leslie Tagorda, an Aquarius boss woman, a brand designer, and business astrologer. I help visionary spiritual entrepreneurs and impact makers just like you reach your highest potential and become the luminaries you are star-charted to be.
Hi Leslie. Hi everyone.
So, Jeff is really used to being behind the scenes. If you've come to one of my workshops, every once in a while, he'll pop in, but do know that Jeff is always there. He knows all of your names. He knows the entire process. We've been working for so long together that he's basically just can read my mind, which I know, if you're a business coach and you should never really be dependent on a person exactly like that, but it works. So, hey, Jeff, why don't you introduce yourself and what you do for the Savvy Luminary?
So I'm Jeff. I've been with Leslie for about 11 years now.
Holy smokes.
We do web design. So I'm more Leslie takes more of the admin side, but now we're switching over to me taking over the admin so we can get Leslie more in the public facing side of everything. And then so I take care of the client work. So all the emails that you guys get usually come from me. All the tech that we go through, I'm usually there in the back end, like Leslie said. And then now I guess we're just trying to get me out there more. And then on the side, I'm a YouTuber.
Yes. A perfect Gemini. Jeff is a Gemini sun. And so, lots of different interests. And then, I'm a Gemini rising. So we kind of connect there. We just our talents and our interests spread wide. And then, for those of you who might not know, yes, we are talking about our anniversary episode today at the Savvy Luminary. But the Savvy Luminary is just one part of my bigger business, New Moon Creative, that we started back in 2004. Jeff came on and would you say
2010, I think?
And so we started off as web design and branding design, and we still do that. We don't talk that much about it in this podcast, but so, Jeff has really taken the helm on that portion and leg of the business with just managing and executing on everything. But here in the Savvy Luminary podcast, we committed a year ago today to bring you weekly episodes, and Jeff is there every week waiting so patiently for me to be I'm gonna get you the episode, I'm gonna get you the recordings, and then he sits there and what do you do once I give you these episodes?
So I listen to the podcast. I'll listen to it once through, and then I kind of make my notes of just okay, where I need to cut, and then I go in and fine tune the little pauses that Leslie goes through throughout the episode, and then just make sure it seems like a seamless episode. So when people listen to it, you're not hearing all the different cuts or the different breaks in between the different sections of the podcast.
Yeah. So, Jeff and I are going to dig into that process a little bit more because we want to share that with you. But really today, Jeff and I really wanted to kind of go through, our year anniversary, what our initial goals were when we wanted to start this podcast. Of course, our process, because, after a year of doing something, you get really clear what that process is, right? In the practice of it all. And then I wanted to talk over just all the things that we've learned and all the impact that this little podcast has had over the year. And then maybe if we have some time, we'll talk about what we're going to be building in the future. Sound good, Jeff?
I'm so excited. Yes, it's going to be a great year for the Savvy Luminary. And the last year, just to see how much growth has happened over the last year is crazy to me. For something that we never really knew what to do in the beginning, we just committed and showed up, and it paid off.
Yes. I mean, okay, so Jeff in my relationship, like, he is so used to me having all these like crazy ideas, and Jeff's like, okay, yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
So when was this? Probably like back in like middle of 2019. I was like, hey, I want to start a podcast because there was some astrology podcasts out there. And, there's a couple of other more like business kind of astrology, but nothing that was like really diving deep into like, if you're an entrepreneur and what you're working on, how do you show up based on astrology? So I found that there was like this real gap, even though maybe people are still not used to understanding, hey, that you can really use astrology for business. But we went through the entire process. We hired a podcast coach that helped us plan everything, because there's all these little moving pieces in building out a podcast, right? Like, what did we have to do when we planned this podcast out? Like, there were so many things.
Yeah, I think it's just finding the right little niche, I guess, on Apple to see where we're gonna fit. And like, how do we
categories?
Yeah. And then how to like really stand out from just like the astrology, because when we were kind of worried that people are still afraid of astrology and not knowing how to use it for their business. But when we realized like it's possible, like we used it for New Moon Creative and it works. We just kind of stayed in our lane, and we did a lot of research of like how it could really help people. And I think it showed.
Right. And, a lot of that was intentional, right? Like when we were planning the podcast, like the biggest thing I think for the podcast was that our biggest commitment when we were setting out our goals was that we were committing to having an episode a week, right?
Yes.
And then we had to decide on the artwork. We had to decide on the podcast categories. We had to decide on, which podcast host to be on, how we were going to deliver our show notes, like how we were going to get this on social media and all the promotion that comes with even just putting an episode out there. It's not like you can just put an episode out there and then people will come. There are like billions of podcast episodes coming out every week. And so I think, how did you feel when I was like, oh, Jeff, we're going to commit to a weekly episode? What was your first gut reaction?
My first gut reaction was, that's bold. I think for us, because working together, like, we dream big. Sometimes some of those dreams don't come true. Like we'll write it down and then maybe we'll forget it. I was more like, okay, if we're going to do it, we're going to do it. I mean, we did it. And like there's some times throughout the year where we were kind of feeling burnt out. And I was like, oh no, Leslie, take a week off. Like, you deserve it. But then you're like, no, we committed. And, I'm glad we did. I'm glad you talked me out of taking a break.
Right. And now for most people, like, we know, like there's like the wonderful Sarah Dean of Shameless Mom Academy, who has committed to multi-week posts. She'll have like a couple of episodes, but she is able to like batch her podcast posts. And that's what people in the industry are like, okay, you have to batch all of your episodes so that you have them all planned out. And, we are not like that.
We've tried to, like, we've scheduled days to plan out the rest of the month. And like we plan it out, but we don't have time. I'm not saying we don't have time. It's just with Leslie, the energies flow into her when she records these podcasts. So we want to make sure the energy's right. And so batch recording just doesn't work out for us.
Yeah.
And it works out for other people, but just for our business and this podcast, it's not our way of doing things. And that's totally fine.
Yeah, we've tried so many times to batch and have like podcast episodes recorded, and I just can't do it. Like it always, and if then we're like, okay, the podcast gets released on Sundays, we'll come out and I'll like say, okay, I'm going to record it on Wednesday. And like every freaking week for 52 weeks, it's always Friday. And so here we are, Friday, February 12th, we're recording this and it's going out on February 14th.
Yeah. Exactly. One of the main things is just like, we want to protect our energy. And so like if we can't record it on like a Wednesday or a Thursday, like it's like I've learned to be like, it's fine. As long as we're not feeling the rush, we're not feeling the pressure to do it. Because when we do feel the pressure, it just doesn't come out the way that we would want it. And then
yeah, and you have that kind of magic where I'm talking on tangents. I'm just basically talking to myself under the stairs here in my little nook. And I'm like, what the heck am I talking about? I have no idea what this sounds like, Jeff. And I hand the recording and he does his little magic and like twinkles everything and moves things around. It's like, oh, and then people are like, this was a great episode.
Yeah. And it happens so many times. Like when we look at our stats, we're like, oh, we're surprised of how well it does in the week, in the first 24 hours, when like Leslie doesn't feel like it's a really good episode or it's just too much information. But those are the episodes that do really, really well.
Yeah, isn't that funny?
It's crazy.
It just boggles. It boggles me. It boggles me. So yeah, if we go back to just like the reason, so I wanted to go back to kind of the roots, right? Because we have the 2020 hindsight now, is that what it's called? Right. So, 52 weeks in, an entire year, and we'll talk about like the anniversary, why that's so special. But, going back to the beginning, it's like, I wanted to start this podcast because yes, I wanted to get the word out about astrology as a practical, specific tool for business. I wanted to expand the visibility of my work to a wider global audience. I wanted to, of course, promote my business and my offerings, right? Like this is still a business. And I wanted to share the voices of other spiritual entrepreneurs in their brand journey. Do you think we accomplished those goals this year?
I think we surpassed those goals this year. We got like the visibility that this podcast and you have this past year was crazy, all during a pandemic. Like right. When we planned it, like we had no idea that we were going to shut down we're still shut down.
Yeah.
We're still in lockdown, and like it never slowed us down. Like I think we pushed like even harder now that we were kind of locked down. We were able to sit down and really focus on what we want to deliver for the podcast. And we got you out there you're like, I guess on 8 in the last year, 8 people.
Yeah. Like having guests on, or for me being on other people's podcasts?
For you being on other people's podcasts, and as well as people coming onto our podcast and sharing their story with working with you, and then you kind of showing what you do with astrology and business.
Yeah. And so it's really interesting because, like being a guest on other people's podcasts, that has always been kind of like, we weren't ever really strategic or intentional without like just going out and saying, hey, I want to pitch you and be a person on the podcast. Like we haven't yet gotten to that place, like after this whole year of pandemic, like just churning out content. But we were really able to streamline things. And so with the wider global audience, like, yeah, we have listeners from all over who like, you can see the map on Libsyn, right? Libsyn is our podcast host. And where are people finding us?
Yeah, so I mean, of course, all across of America, we have people in Canada, all over Europe. Australia is another big one for us. Let's see, India, some places in Asia, and South Africa as well. So South like Africa, people are just like, people are just coming all over the place. And it's crazy to see how far we've reached with this podcast within a year.
Yes. And then, of course, like my favorite podcast episodes are sharing the voices of other spiritual entrepreneurs on their brand journey, like having kind of like my business besties just come on and talk. And it's just like, it's fun. It's like, wow, this is like really valuable content, but we're just having so much fun creating it. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah, so let's look back. So one of the big things that was in the very beginning of the podcast, right, when we decided that, okay, first we decided that we were going to be consistent and deliver weekly episodes. And so far we've delivered, 54 and 54? Counting?
Yeah, with like a few bonus episodes.
Yeah, because when we launched on February 14th, and we'll talk about that kind of launch party, but we launched on February 14th, and we decided to go, that was our other big thing. We decided to go big, right?
Yes, we did.
On February 14th, and we'll have some highlights from that party if you go to our show notes at thesavvyluminary.com. But we flew up Chamonix from LA. We had some friends fly in from all over the world to come participate. We had this big party on Valentine's Day, and like you brought all your friends, and you were making all of the beautiful, we had like goodie bags, we had all of these things, and that was like the most epic party, like to throw.
It was, and it's crazy to think like that's one of the last biggest gatherings I've been to.
Right. And then, at that party, there were all those whispers of COVID already happening.
And then like maybe a month later, like we were on lockdown already.
Yeah, that was like the last big event.
Yeah.
So I'm glad we did it.
I'm glad we did it. It was such a fun like launch for the podcast. And I think it was a great way to kind of put yourself out there.
Yes.
And like it I guess it kind of just like it started it all there. And then it grew and grew and grew.
Yeah. So, well, during the party, there were, we met a lot of new people. There were some podcasters in the Bay Area that showed up.
Mm-hmm.
There were some astrologers from all over California that showed up that I got to meet that day. And that was like such a wonderful way. Now, so the party was on February 14th. And the reason why we decided that as like our initial launch day was because it happens to be my birthday. And so when we come up across this first year anniversary, it's a solar return of our business, but it's also my solar return. And so it feels so connected to me as just like this natural extension. Of course, we've learned a lot, but let's talk about what we actually accomplished in the first year of podcast. So how many episodes did we actually create?
In total with the bonus episodes, probably about 58.
Yeah, 58. So this anniversary episode is technically our 55th episode, 52 weeks in a year. So we have 3 extra bonus episodes. How many downloads have we had so far?
About just a little over 12K.
Wow. Yeah, and it grows exponentially, right? Like, I think if you look back to Libsyn to like in February, like that very first month, what was the total downloads in that very first month for those episodes? Because, I think at the very beginning, you have all these grand aspirations of having this huge epic download. Like everybody's going to be like, oh my gosh, we need to listen to all this new content. But, when it really happens, it's kind of like, oh.
No, exactly, right? Like I think we were always checking the numbers on a daily basis.
Totally. Driving ourselves crazy.
Exactly. And here. So I pulled like our first month and that was at 280.
Okay, so our very first month with, I think we preloaded, we had like 4 or 5 episodes, 4 episodes that month, 280. So that's like a little more than 60 listens per episode in that first month.
Yeah.
And we're not a huge podcast yet, but we are here for the long game. Yeah. Like this is a commitment. And so what is our average episode in a month now?
We're averaging about like right under 1,500 a month.
That's great. So with four episodes a month, that is like about 400 listens per episode.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, just looking at that's like, oh, wow, look at all the progress we've made in a year. Now, I want to talk about a little bit about our process, right? Because so we talked about our process where you can't get me to save my life to batch process and record episodes. Like we'll have some interviews backed up and stuff and to send them out at the right time. But other than that, like I'm like totally flying by the seat of my pants. But one of the wonderful things that we've learned is that, okay, for every single episode, we pulled in mantras, we pulled in user questions, we talk about the astrology of the week, and it produces a shoot ton of content every week, right?
Yeah.
So every time I give you the podcast, we produce a weekly email to blast it out. We produce a YouTube video. We produce Pinterest pins to promote it. We produce all of the Instagram, like just for the covers. We have our quotes and our mantras. We have our, and of course, our group, our community, the Savvy Luminary. So if you're not already there, the Savvy Luminary, our Facebook group is like really where like the intimacy happens, because the people who are super, super interested in astrology come into the group. They ask questions. We have a lot of conversations. I do a ton of teaching there, and they're intertwined. So I'm not having to create tons and tons of content. We just have our one episode and it just like spawns out all of this content. Really, for each episode, we are repurposing and probably creating at least 20 pieces of content from one episode. So it's like just this repurposing machine. And, you know, neither of us are very process oriented. So we, you know, like it's taken us a year to get like really streamlined, but we are definitely getting there. So let's talk about some of the things that like we really learned over this last year. What are some of your takeaways, maybe just like kind of on the back end or the process, or like just doing all the management of like guests, like your perspective of what you've learned over the last year?
I think I've learned to, I mean, I know you said we're not really process people, but like I've created my own like process of just, okay, if we have a guest, we have to make sure, like that's a whole nother set. If we have guest interviews, that's a whole nother set of things that we have to produce. And just doing a checklist of like, okay, so Leslie recorded the episode. Did she record everything that we needed, like for the astrology of the week, the house by house graphics? And then I go from there, I'll just go in and listen to the podcast, make my cuts and edits as usual. And then just making sure that the big topics that Leslie talks about, I always want to make sure I create those additional graphics, because maybe not everyone's going to listen to the podcast, but we get people on social media that will get the exact same content in a more digestible way.
Yeah. And like each of those pieces of content then are like feeding people back to the podcast, right? Yeah. Because it's not just the people who are already subscribed, which I hope you're a subscriber, but it's also then the people who newly discover it through different social media posts.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest thing that I've learned, and I think this is because of my Saturn in the first house, is that, you know, first house of like doing and being, is that for me, it is a discipline. It is a practice. Mm-hmm. And in my life, if I think about it, it's always the things that I've committed to, like being a classical musician, or when I was able to go to weekly or daily yoga classes. Like if I committed to like a daily practice, like I could totally do it. And so I know over the course of the year, my speaking has just gotten way better. Like my ability to talk about things and to talk about things clearly, to ask right questions, and just to be really comfortable behind the mic. Like that has gotten, you've heard the difference, right?
I totally heard the difference from like our first few episodes to what it is now. I remember editing the first few episodes and like removing all the ums. Removing all the ums. And like, I'm not saying ums are bad. It just, for us, we wanted to make sure, I mean, that was us making sure it was perfect. Mm-hmm. And so that's one of the things I really learned is just like, we can't always make things perfect. Like there's always going to be something that's going to look a little off or sound a little off, but we're just going to have to be okay with it and like own up to it.
Yes.
But like, in regards to your speaking, like now you just kind of go through an episode, you fly through an episode, and I'm rarely doing edits of like cutting the ums. Like that's so rare for me to do nowadays.
Good. That's so good to hear. I want to point out like that perfectionism thing. You know, like I feel like I am committed to like always getting better and like always improving, but I am not a perfectionist in any means, because I don't believe in getting stuck in that. Like there's perfect is the opposite of done, right? Like I just want to get it done. I just want to like make revisions afterwards. I just want to come back to the things. And so for anybody listening who finds himself getting stuck in perfection, I urge you to like go back to like episode 1 or episode 2 and just like, and just take a listen, because, you know, like I couldn't have gotten to episode 55 if I didn't decide that I wasn't going to let things just be and just show up perfectly imperfect, right? And things, we still have a lot of things to like that I want to improve in the future, but we'll come back to that, what I want to do in the future. So let's talk about the biggest results and impact that, you know, like, okay, so what has happened? What is the result of 55 episodes, right? So just in a business sense, like, yes, podcasts are freaking amazing promotional tools.
Yes.
right? Like from 2019 to 2020, the revenue had gone up like I think 40% or 40 or
That
60.
sounds about right. Yeah.
Yeah, it was something crazy. And we just kept on like every month just kind of like growing past our bottom line each time. It was just like looking at the metrics, I was like, wow, these I had no idea that it was really going to have that kind of monetary effect, even though this is free content. Like my business has really grown with just people hiring me for astrology, hiring me for design. Well, not hiring me, hiring us, hiring the business for all of these things that we wouldn't have otherwise met all of these people if it wasn't for this podcast, right?
Yeah.
And then of course there's like the impact on the listeners. And oh my gosh, we have some beautiful listener testimonials here. I asked all my groups and some friends if they would leave messages, little love notes about how this podcast has changed their lives. So let's take a listen. And the first testimonial comes from my business bestie. Her name is Asha Frost. She is the Indigenous medicine woman. She's also been a guest, and I just love everything about Asha. And I actually write astrology posts for her membership. Her membership is called Sacred. And so I love her and I love her communities. I always feel so welcome. So let's take a listen.
I love listening to Leslie's podcast, The Savvy Luminary. It truly guides me. It downloads all of this amazing wisdom. Every time there's a shift in my life, I tune in to see what's going on in the stars. I've also loved being a guest on her podcast. She asks the best questions, and she really is a special light in the world.
I was so honored to be part of Leslie's podcast launch. I respect her clarity and expertise and her warmth. The thing that I've gained from Leslie through her podcast, but just through her presence, I feel that everything she offers is just such a gift. It's so generous, and it's just oozing out of everything that she does. I just appreciate what you offer, Leslie.
This is Adriana Locke, and I just want to express my love and gratitude for the Savvy Luminary Podcast. It's such a sweet reminder to move with the seasons, move with the stars in business. It's been an honor to be a guest and be included in the love, and I just love that this is in the world, and I love hearing Leslie's sweet and encouraging voice getting us ready for the success that we love and doing it our way and doing it in a way that feels awesome. So thank you so much, Leslie and the Savvy Luminary.
My name is Sweta, and I absolutely love the Savvy Luminary Podcast. I've been obsessed with astrology for the past couple of years. I've taken different courses, but when I came across Leslie's work, I just got so excited. I absolutely love the way she takes astrology and she applies it to business through her branding. I even just said in the Facebook group today that I'm so jealous of her placements that she gets to do this work. I've learned so much more from her free podcast than I have from even taking paid classes. She's incredibly generous and she has a real gift. And so I'm wishing you a very happy anniversary. I'm so grateful that I've come into your sphere, and I'm really excited about your work spreading to more people.
Hi, Leslie. This is Michelle Price with Breakthrough Business Strategies. I have absolutely loved listening to the Savvy Luminary this past year, and the help that you have given me to really hone in to the little niches in the areas of my brand astrology to help me be able to stand completely in the power of the work that I do with my clients has just been delightful and phenomenal and eye-opening. Thank you so much.
Hi, I am Karen Marzak, the founder of Energy Medicine for Modern Living and the creator of the Biofield Method. I want to say congratulations on your 1-year anniversary. The Savvy Luminary Podcast is a gem. I have listened to each and every episode since the beginning, and I've also been honored to be a guest on the podcast. And I wanted to say that this podcast has become a really special resource for me because I use it as part of my weekly planning ritual. So what I do is I light a candle and I turn on the podcast. I listen on Sundays. That sets the tone for me. And then I plan my week ahead. So I am so grateful for the information and the astrological guidance that I can receive from your podcast as an entrepreneur. Thanks so much and happy 1-year anniversary.
Oh, thank you so much, everyone, for your kind and loving words. I have so many happy tears hearing it all. And then, of course, there was impact on visibility, right? So visibility in terms like on social media or our email list, right? So this podcast is part of several different kind of channels. We have this podcast, we have our newsletter, which gives everybody their monthly astrology. We have our Savvy Luminary group. We have Instagram. We have like so many places, right? And yes, we're in process of getting things streamlined, but this is one thing that part of the daily practice is that we track these things. We have a VA that tracks all of our metrics on a monthly basis. And so consistently, not only have we seen our podcast metrics grow, but we've seen our email subscription grow. We've seen our Savvy Luminary Facebook group grow. Like we actually just hit 1,000 users yesterday. Like,
yep.
Wow, like all of these things are coming to like this culmination right now. And so that has been awesome, but not just in the visibility in like our business metrics, but just being invited to speak on other people's podcasts, to speak in other people's memberships. Like over the last year, without even trying, getting invited to Grace Duong's Mystic Mondays group, Kathleen Stewart's Lady Politicos. And I don't know if I've ever mentioned this here, but the wonderful Kate Northrup found me, and now I am her business resident astrologer for her group Origin. So, reveal right there, but that was a new position that I took on the beginning of 2020, and she wouldn't have been able to find me if it wasn't for this podcast, because was that in our process, we have our show notes, and our show notes, we change it into a blog page, essentially chock full of keywords, chock full of information. And that's how Kate found me. One day I got this Instagram voicemail from the official Kate Northrup, and I was like, why is Kate Northrup sending me a voicemail? Like, oh my gosh, I was so freaking excited. I basically was like almost peed my pants when I got her message. She's like, I found you on Google. You're very Googleable.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what one of our focus is, just creating so much content that when people search up brand astrology or Astrobrand, like you pop up.
And business astrology or astrology for entrepreneurs. Yeah, we've been really intentional about those keywords. 4 keywords, right? And so, she found me. She's like, I've been looking for a new resident business astrologer. And I was like, oh my gosh, my dreams have been heard. Yeah. So that impact on visibility has really helped because of this commitment to the year. And then lastly, there's this idea of the impact on astrology, right? Astrology is in this like current limelight. It's like all the rage, and astrology is being used in so many professions now, whether it's just, for personal development or now for professional development. I love chatting with people and like learning how they're using astrology and reinventing it in their business. So I feel like also this podcast has really brought business astrology, and specifically my version of business astrology, which is focused on brand, the leadership and the experience that somebody has with your business, like how to empower all business owners to be more aligned and authentic using their stars. So I feel like this podcast has really helped astrology in general in that way.
Yeah, totally. And like showed Leslie a few weeks ago that the wrestling company that I like really enjoy, they're using astrology too. Maybe not in the same sense as like in a business way, but it's, seeing astrology in wrestling I would have never thought I would have seen something like that. But to see how popular astrology has gotten throughout, like within the last year.
Yes.
Just so crazy to see how much it's grown and has come into the limelight.
Yes, it's about time. It's not that like astrology has ever left, but it's definitely become more a part of the zeitgeist. And I'm going to have Jeff come back on in a future episode to talk about his YouTube journey, right? Like he's so multifaceted, right? He's doing web design for me and graphic design and like video editing and podcast editing, all things technology from his little corner of the universe. But I really want people to hear his story about running a YouTube channel, like a really visible and popular YouTube channel about women's wrestling. Like, go figure. How can you get more niche than that?
Exactly. Yeah. And like a lot of things I've done in the past year for my YouTube channel and like me coming out with a podcast in the future was because I took astrology, like everything that Leslie's talked about and taught everyone, I've learned from it as well. And like knowing that it was in my stars, that what I'm doing was kind of like was what I meant to do. What I wanted, my messaging that I want to share with everyone was something that was in the stars for me. So it's crazy of how much me personally I've grown through astrology.
That's so wonderful. So wonderful to hear. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what we want to create in the future. So, okay, totally, like this is the pop quiz question, Jeff. Like, working on this podcast for the last year, what, in your perfect world, what would you love to see us do?
I want us to be more global, international. Like we're international now, but like I want to be able to like get you out there to like maybe whenever traveling is going to be okay. Like maybe someone's going to fly you out to the other side of the world to do an astrology workshop. Like that's the big things I see for this podcast. What do you see for this podcast?
Well, like my maximizer self, like I really want to kind of perfect some of the sound design, maybe like finally get like a real composed intro instead of our stock music. I'd love to feature more amazing, like bring in more guests on a really regular basis, get very intentional. I want to speak on bigger, like even larger podcasts. I have some exciting episodes coming up in the very near future with Teresa Reed, the tarot lady. Yeah, and just kind of still committing to the future and getting more streamlined in terms of helping people. Like that's ultimately the goal. Like I would love more people to leave their user questions. Like we recently just put up SpeakPipe, speakpipe.com/the Savvy Luminary. I want people to leave their voice messages and, answer those questions. I want people to get really curious with how they are meant to show up in the world, and just want that to just continue expanding. That would just like warm my heart. Now that we're approaching our second year and we're just keeping on refining and perfecting. Like I don't have plans to stop.
No, I don't have plans either.
Well, thank you, Jeff, for sharing this time with me and introducing you into the world so that people know, like, hey, like Jeff is really such an expert in so many things, and this podcast would not be possible without him behind the scenes. We will definitely have you back because I want to share your story about like your journey into what you do now for me, but also as a YouTuber and all those things and all of your intersectionality. We didn't even talk about like kind of like your roots and like how we know each other and all that.
Yeah, totally. We'll save that for another episode, and it's going to be a great one for sure.
Yeah. Thank you for reining it in. All right. So let's get into, if that's all, then let's get into the astrology of the week.
Okay.
Okie dokie. So let's dive into the astrology of the week of February 14th through the 21st, 2021. So we are on our home stretch of our first Mercury retrograde cycle. And in that process, today on the 14th, on Sunday at 1:40 p.m. Pacific and 4:40 p.m. Eastern, Mercury retrograde is meeting Jupiter in the sky. Because of the retrograde motion going back and forth, Mercury will again hit Jupiter as it goes direct later on in the month. So for today, the theme is rethink your spiritual evolution and business growth. How has your spiritual entrepreneurship helped expand humanity's evolution, and who will you partner with? It is a great day to send a message or promotion to get it out into the wider world. All right. So thinking about the idea of resending Mercury retrograde, resending an existing message, right? So not everybody sends messages on Sundays. I do, but thinking about, if you get a chance, resend one of those messages. Also, happy Valentine's Day. Today is so much more than romance and love. It's a day about expanding your thoughts and calling into action your aligned partners with a shared vision of the future. Today, Mercury, moving backwards, touches upon expansive visionary Jupiter and still so close to Venus, right? Jupiter and Venus met last week when it was the new moon, that epic Aquarian pileup, 6 planets in Aquarius during that new moon. Whew, that was a hard one for me. There is a spiritual essence to your messaging and vision today. Your belief about what is possible in expansion is gaining clarity. If you have something to repeat so that you can further your message or help clarify your beliefs in your business and communities, today would be a good day to say it again. Resend that email, repost that inspirational story, retell how you are here to serve, recall in your aligned partners to help expand the shared vision of the future. If you need more insight, look to Aquarius with 13 degrees, where these two energies meet today. The house that contains this point and any natal planets you have around 13 degrees of fixed signs or air signs will want to add in their voice and vision to give you clarity. And then on Wednesday, February 17th, we have the exact meeting of our Time Lord Saturn squaring off with innovative, no bounds Uranus, right? And so these two slow moving planets, this meetup, this exact meetup happens on Wednesday the 17th at 11:08 a.m. Pacific and 2:08 p.m. Eastern. Now, it doesn't quite matter that this is the exact meeting point, because honestly, 2021, this is the theme of the entire year, okay? Because these two moving planets, like Uranus takes 84 years to go around the sun, and Saturn takes 28 years. So these two planetary bodies from our perspective on the Earth are just kind of like slowly taking their time, right? And so this square has been in orb, meaning that we have felt this energy starting to build all the way since the beginning of 2021. So way back in January, we were already feeling this energy build, and then it's going to go away. Saturn's going to go in reverse later on in the year. They're going to meet up again, and then they're going to then Saturn's going to get out of reverse and it's going to go forward again, and they're going to yet meet again. So there are going to be 3 meetings of these two planetary energies in a square. So in traditional astrology, squares are these kind of like tension points. These are things where things are feeling like they're breaking, where there are things that are coming from the outside, things are coming from the inside. But in business astrology and kind of more empowered astrology, not Pollyanna astrology, if we choose to look at these squares, we can choose to see that these are the creative tensions that fuel change. So when Saturn and Uranus come together, whether it's a square or a conjunction or an opposition, the idea between these two planetary energies is that these are structures that need to evolve, right? And so when it's a square now, and this is a waning square, so think of it as like a waning moon, like a fourth quarter moon, right? Where the moon starts to lose its light. That would be an example of that kind of waning square that Saturn and Uranus are making. And so this is a time to break down structures to evolve, right? So you can see how 2021, in just the grand scheme of like what's happening here in the United States, what's happening here on planet Earth, there's a lot of structures that need to come down that are now like at that breaking point, right? So when you think about it for your business on a personal level, or like your business level, meaning personal, like it's happening to you, what structures are no longer sustainable? That's Saturn, sustainable for the long term, and are breaking down. That's the square, that creative tension, so that we can innovate and evolve. You've been feeling this buildup for about a month now, the feeling that something needs to break, or maybe something is already broken. Today, we have the first exact meeting of Saturn squaring off with Uranus. This is, again, the central theme of the year. Well, it doesn't necessarily feel comfortable. This tension is a necessary part for innovation. The first meeting of these two outer slow-moving energies is a breakdown. What is or has fallen apart? What needs to break so we can build anew? Now is the time to see all the pieces that are disassembled. In June, during the second meeting, you'll be super clear on what pieces you'll retain, repair, or recycle. For now, notice and learn to find peace within, so as you can't control outside forces. Notice in your life and business your boundaries, structures, and systems that start to feel at the brink. In our businesses, we can feel this as the need to simplify. Oh my gosh. Side note, like I am totally feeling this. I don't have any clarity of like what I yet want to build. I know that my business is a little bit too gnarly right now. Too many things going on. And side note, to focus on the things that will make the biggest impact, and to work in a way that feels sustainable. We are all past the need to hustle. Know that innovation is coming and it will be more circular, effective, and sustainable. We need this. Collectively, notice the social issues that still need solutions or the environment that needs restoration. We all must do our part. Turn off the water if you're leaving it on while you brush your teeth. Like, oh my gosh, that is such a simple thing to do. Hello, David, my husband, do you hear me? In 2021, we get to choose how we repair the system to make it equitable. On February 18th, on Thursday, the sun enters Pisces at exactly 2:44 a.m. Pacific, 5:44 a.m. Eastern. When the sun enters Pisces, it is the season for connectivity and compassion. How can you bring in more ease and imagination into your business? It's a season to connect to your highest self, your divine, so that you can make things easier. Things are starting to feel a bit less heavy, right? 2021 so far has been pretty heavy. And if you haven't already started on your New Year's, or even though your New Year's resolutions, right? Or your New Year's goals, even though we're already 6 weeks in, you're beginning to feel like you can begin to come out now. With Pisces season, it's all about bringing in ease and flow. How can we work with our divine or our highest selves? How can we feel into our work and make intuitive business decisions? How can we access our deepest knowing through Piscean efforts like dreaming, imagination, music, imagery, poetry? There is nothing logical about Pisces. So how do you go with the flow this season? On February 19th, we are so close to the end of our first Mercury retrograde cycle because Mercury comes to a complete stop. It stations to prepare to go forward. So it's called Stations Direct at 11 degrees of Aquarius. Today, communications and thoughts pause to intensify. So anytime Mercury or one of the planets stops before changing directions, it's normally a pretty intense day for that energy. So again, communications, anything to do with technology and communications, That got your Mercury. So it's a great day to clear your calendar again to make space. We're almost done with our first full retrograde cycle, Mercury retrograde cycle in 2021. And in a few days, Mercury shifts gears to go forward again. Yay! But before moving forward, Mercury appears to come to a stop. And as it stalls, Mercury will sit on this 1 degree of the chart at Aquarius of 11 degrees. This day can feel overwhelming, like you can't organize your thoughts, but there is clarity when you slow down. It's okay to clear your mind to let the important visions trickle in. You do know. Give yourself the space to receive this information. Do note, this is a day you don't want to go rushing from place to place. Not that there is anywhere to go right now. If you have to get in a car or commute, pad your travel time. And of course, prepare for technical glitches. If you have any natal energies at Aquarius, fixed signs, or air signs of 11 degrees, you will feel this intensity a little bit more. On Friday, the 19th, we have our second quarter moon in Gemini at 1 degree. At 10:47 a.m. Pacific and 1:47 p.m. Eastern, we have our second quarter moon, which is kicking us into gear to act and create dialogue. Yes. So second quarter moon is all about getting started and initiating and really taking action on your intentions. And Gemini is about creating dialogue and engaging. What is one thing you can communicate today that will take action on your intention? You may have changed your mind with something. That's Gemini. It's okay. What needs to be communicated now that you have seen things in a different light? What action can you take that supports bringing in your new moon intention that uses Gemini energy, such as engaging in a conversation, asking curious questions, and just creating dialogues? Later on that day, we also have Venus squaring off with Mars, exactly at 3:04 p.m. Pacific, 6:04 p.m. Eastern. And when Venus, the lovely energy to beautify and connect, and Mars, the assertive energy for motivation and drive, when they square off, creativity is in the challenge. How are your passionate values, Venus, stirring up fuel for change? For a bit more than a day, your passions run high, but there's definitely creative tension. If you can play with that edge, exploring the square between your values and motivations, there may be experiences that are preventing you from initiating, right? Like maybe you want to get started, but you can't right now. Or even people that are creating conflict, like, why does everybody have to be so difficult? Move towards that hard place, because that's where the creativity and magic is ready to take action. If you know your chart, look to the fixed signs at 22 degrees, as Venus in Aquarius at 22 degrees squares with Mars in Taurus at 22 degrees. Your natal energies in and around 22 degrees of fixed signs, so Aquarius, Taurus, Scorpio, and Leo, will add to your powerful, can't stop creative problem solving. I look forward to this. This is going to be a big one for me personally. On February 20th, 2021, we are done with Mercury retrograde, because Mercury now shifts gears, still at 11 degrees, right? Because it stopped there a couple of days ago at 4:52 p.m. Pacific and 7:52 p.m. Eastern. Mercury shifts gears to forward. Your thoughts and communications are now free to flow forward. What complete clarity do you now have about the future of your business and the way you are meant to deliver social impact, right? This past new moon last week was all about figuring out what is your social impact, who are your social impact makers that you're going to co-create with, all of those things. And it was so funny when I did a new moon ceremony last week. That was probably like the most difficult ceremony I've ever had. I could not find my words to save my life. Like there were no thoughts coming in my head very clearly. I couldn't find the words. I was all over the place. Even though I knew exactly what I wanted to say, it just wouldn't come out. Thank you, Mercury retrograde. But now that this retrograde is over, all of those seeds that you've been planting over the New Year's, even if, or the last new moon in Aquarius, even if you hadn't been able to get clear, like everything was just kind of in this murky muck, trust that now everything is going to get clear. The waters are going to, like, all of that muddy, murky water is going to clarify as Mercury is moving forward slowly at first, right? Just like when you're shifting gears from reverse to forward, you can, you've got to step on the gas, and you don't go from 0 to 60. You can begin putting your plans in place. Now, Mercury retrogrades, the whole cycle won't be over until March 13th, when Mercury leaves the shadow zone where it entered Aquarius. It reversed at Aquarius of 26 degrees. So now Mercury has to retrace that path from 11 degrees to 26 degrees. When Mercury leaves Aquarius 26 degrees on March 13th, we will be officially over the full Mercury retrograde cycle because it'll left the shadow. That's when Mercury starts to go quick again, and you will be back to normal if you don't already have a natal Mercury retrograde. Okie dokie, that's all I have for today. Thank you so much for celebrating with us this anniversary episode. It just brings my heart so much joy to hear, how people love listening to this podcast and how they make it a part of their weekly ritual. If you feel so open and inclined, please leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts, because each rating and review helps the algorithms that be get this podcast more visible to more people so that we can spread this amazing tool of astrology for entrepreneurship. All right, until next week, thank you again for making space and celebrating with me today. Mahalo for listening to this brand new podcast. If you enjoyed learning about astrology for entrepreneurs, help me spread the word by sharing this podcast with your business besties, and hop over to the Savvy Luminary for links to episode notes and our free Facebook community where you can send me questions about astrology or branding, as well as connect with other like-minded businesses.